So if you are entirely unconditionally loved by God, I mean, with a love that you absolutely cannot earn, you can't lose it, and you can't diminish it, does it actually matter how you live your life on a random Tuesday afternoon?
Right. That is the big question.
Because you really have to think about it. It's this fascinating paradox. If the safety net is completely 100% guaranteed, why not just do whatever you want? Why stress about, morality or obedience if your eternal identity is totally locked in?
Yeah, it sounds almost like a loophole when you phrase it that way.
Exactly. But today, in this deep dive, we're unpacking a stack of sources to decode two concepts that constantly get tangled up and just cause massive confusion for believers. And that is God's unconditional love versus his conditional pleasure.
And honestly, it is arguably the most critical distinction you can make if you want to understand really your own spiritual architecture.
Makes sense.
And I want to clarify right out of the gate, we are not approaching this from a place of trying to induce guilt or, micromanage your behavior. This is really about understanding the mechanics of a mature spiritual life.
Because blurring those lines is dangerous, right?
Extremely dangerous. Blurring the lines between your foundational identity and your daily spiritual authority is exactly what stunts a person's growth.
Okay, well, let's unpack this. Because to really understand the stakes of our daily lives, we first have to separate what is permanent about our identity from what's actually conditional about our daily experience. Let's start with love.
Yeah, that's the foundation.
Right. So the sources talk about the Greek word used in the New Testament, which is agape. It's foundational. It's like this self-sacrificing baseline posture toward humanity that is completely unconditional.
Which, to be fair, is incredibly difficult for the human psyche to actually grasp. I mean, we are entirely wired to earn love.
Oh, 100%. From day one.
Right. You earn affection from your parents by being a good kid. You earn praise from your boss by hitting your metrics. But agape love operates on a completely different economy. It is based entirely on God's character, not on your performance.
Which is such a relief to hear.
It is. The Apostle Paul writes in Romans 5 that this love was demonstrated while people were still actively rebelling, so you don't earn it by being holy.
Right, and you can't lose it by failing either. Like Paul writes later in Romans 8 that absolutely nothing, not angels, demons, life, death, nothing can separate a believer from that love. It's just a constant baseline.
A total safety net.
But here is where I get stuck, and I think a lot of people probably get stuck here too. If God's love is truly unconditional, why does he even care if we, quote unquote, please him? Doesn't the very idea of pleasing God introduce this whole performance metric that ruins the concept of free grace?
And that is the exact tension we need to resolve today. The framework from our sources argues that God's love is unconditional, yes, but his pleasure, his approval, his delight, that is highly conditional.
Wow, okay, so it changes based on what we do.
Exactly. It is a direct response to a believer's actions. Think about the writer of Hebrews who draws a very, very hard line. He says, without faith, it is impossible to please God.
Impossible. That is a really strong word.
It is, because pleasure is inherently relational. You can be perfectly, fully loved by God, and yet completely fail to please him if you simply refuse to trust him.
Because faith is kind of the currency of that relationship.
Precisely. If you don't trust someone, you just can't have intimacy with them, no matter how much they love you.
Yeah, and it also requires obedience, right? Paul urges believers in Colossians to live in a way that pleases God through good works. And unlike love, pleasure can actually be lost. It can be grieved.
Yes, that's a crucial point.
The sources bring up that narrative in 1 Corinthians about the Israelites in the wilderness. God loved them enough to miraculously rescue them from slavery in Egypt. He literally fed them bread from the sky.
Which is the ultimate display of agape love, provision despite their flaws.
Right. But because of their constant grumbling and unbelief and rebellion, the text explicitly says God was not pleased with most of them. Like, they survived, but they definitely didn't thrive.
The clearest way to really wrap your head around this is through a parent and child dynamic. So imagine a really healthy family where a good father unconditionally loves his teenage son.
Okay, tracking with you.
Now, one night, the son sneaks out, steals the family car, and wrecks it. The biological and emotional foundation of that love does not just cease to exist. The father isn't going to stop loving the boy.
Of course not. That's his kid.
Right. However, the father is absolutely not pleased with the reckless behavior. I mean, his heart is grieved. The trust is totally broken. The pleasure, the pride, the daily delight of that relationship that only returns when the son actually takes responsibility and starts acting with integrity again.
That makes so much sense. It's sort of like being born into a family versus actually being on speaking terms with your family members.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, because one is a biological fact, but the other one takes actual daily effort. Relationship is eternal. It's what happens when you're literally born into the family. But fellowship is experiential. It's based on walking in the light day by day.
And understanding that distinction changes your entire posture. Knowing that God's agape love is this unshakable safety net removes the anxiety of losing your salvation every single time you make a mistake.
You don't have to live in terror.
Exactly. But it's exactly that guaranteed security that provides the psychological safety you need to actually risk the daily obedience that brings God pleasure. You obey not to earn the love, but because you are already fully loved.
Okay, but what happens when we step out of that fellowship? We really need to talk about the consequences of displeasing God here. Because for a lot of people listening, the immediate fear is that God is just going to start throwing lightning bolts.
Right. The whole angry guy in the sky trope.
Yeah. If fellowship and pleasure are conditional, does God actively punish us when we mess up?
Well, the interesting thing is, he doesn't have to. And that is a massive paradigm shift in these sources. Displeasing God isn't met with active punitive strikes from heaven. Instead, stepping out of fellowship creates a destructive, self-inflicted wound.
So it's not God up there zapping us. It's more like stepping out from under an umbrella in a torrential rainstorm and then looking up at the sky and wondering why God is making you wet.
That is the perfect mechanism to describe it. God isn't causing the rain. The rain is just the reality of living in a fallen, chaotic world.
Yeah.
The umbrella is the protective grace of fellowship. When you step out from under that umbrella through active sin or even persistent unbelief, it just acts as an open door.
An open door for what?
It allows adversarial forces to steal, kill, and destroy in your life. It naturally hardens the human heart. You start to become deaf to God's voice and totally blind to the grace you actually possess.
Oh, wow. So you literally lose your divine authority.
Yes, exactly.
Right. When fellowship breaks, you lose your, sense of righteousness. You lose that spiritual confidence. And because of that, your faith just stops working effectively. You lose your authority over the chaos of life, whether that's sickness or poverty or just the overwhelming anxiety of the modern world. You end up living like an ordinary, unredeemed human who is totally subject to the elements. You're living as a victim rather than a victor.
Right. And the theological term for the state is spiritual barrenness. Have you ever felt like, you're doing all the right Christian things, you're serving, you're giving, you're attending, but your spiritual life feels completely dead and exhausting?
Oh, absolutely. Like you're just running on a treadmill but getting nowhere fast.
That happens when a believer tries to operate using their flesh, or what the sources sometimes call soulish power.
Soulish power. What does that mean exactly?
It means relying purely on human intellect, human emotion, and sheer human willpower to do spiritual work. It's like a church leader trying to organize a massive ministry using purely their MBA skills and a ton of caffeine without any actual spiritual dependence.
I feel like I've seen that movie before.
Right. The work might look totally fine on the outside, but it is fundamentally dead. It lacks genuine spiritual power, and ultimately, it fails to bear any eternal fruit.
Okay, so if the consequences of stepping out of fellowship are that severe, exhaustion, burnout, losing your spiritual authority, we need to figure out what is actually tripping us up, what pushes us out from under the umbrella.
That's the logical next question.
Because our default human instinct is always to blame our environment, right? Yeah. We blame our stressful job or our difficult spouse, the culture, the social media algorithms. We just desperately want the problem to be external.
We do. But the New Testament writers completely dismantle that excuse. They draw a very sharp contrast with the Old Testament. The Old Testament law, like the Ten Commandments, heavily focused on managing external behaviors. Don't murder, don't steal.
Very outward-facing.
Yes. But Jesus shifts the focus entirely to internal transformation. He diagnoses the problem not as an external accident, but as an internal disease of the heart.
He really raises the bar in the Sermon on the Mount. He teaches that you don't actually have to commit physical adultery to fail. Simply looking at someone with lust is the exact same internal disease.
Exactly.
He says that evil thoughts, theft, greed, pride, they don't contaminate you from the outside in. They originate from inside the human heart, and they work their way out.
And Jesus breaks down the actual anatomy of temptation to explain this whole mechanism. He says a person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires.
Their own desires. Wow.
Right. The bait might be external, sure, but the hunger is entirely internal. John actually summarizes this as The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life.
Okay, I get the lust part and I get the pride part. Those are pretty obvious vices. But what about the subtler stuff? Like, what about covetousness? How does something as normal as, wanting a better salary or wanting to buy a nicer house fit into this internal disease framework?
Because it's really about the source of your security. Paul explicitly links greed to false worship. He actually calls covetousness idolatry in Colossians.
Wait, idolatry?
Yeah, idolatry isn't just bowing down to a golden statue in the ancient world. It's defined as looking to a created thing, like wealth, a job title, a romantic relationship, to provide the ultimate security and joy that only the Creator is actually meant to provide.
That is heavy.
It is. When you covet, you are basically saying to God, your provision isn't enough to make me safe. I need this external thing to survive.
Wow. So trying to fix that with just strict rule following or legalism is like putting a Band-Aid on a tumor.
Exactly. It doesn't treat the root cause.
Right. If the problem is an internal disease of the heart, managing external symptoms by just trying really hard to be a good person isn't going to cut it. Sheer human willpower will just always fail against the internal flesh.
It always fails. Because willpower is a finite resource. By 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, your willpower is totally depleted. You need a spiritual remedy. You need a way to literally rewire the system so you aren't constantly fighting a losing battle against your own desires.
Okay, so what is the strategy then? How do we actually maintain intimacy with God despite having this incredibly flawed internal human nature? We need a daily blueprint here.
Well, the sources give us one. The first and really the most vital step is the law of displacement, or spiritual replacement.
Okay, how does that work?
Paul writes in Galatians to walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Notice the specific order there. You don't focus on fighting the flesh. You focus on pursuing the Spirit, and the flesh just starves as a byproduct.
Oh, I see. It's like trying to break a doom scrolling habit. You can't just stare at your phone sitting on the coffee table and scream, "Don't touch it."
Right, because eventually you're going to touch it.
Exactly. That takes way too much willpower, and you'll just cave. You actually have to physically put the phone in another room and pick up a really compelling book instead. It's active substitution. You feed the Spirit so much that you don't even want the junk food of the flesh anymore.
That is the exact mechanism. And it pairs perfectly with another specific strategy from the sources, which is fleeing temptation.
Like literally running away.
Literally. It's highly revealing that believers are instructed to resist the devil. But when it comes to internal desires like sexual immorality or youthful lusts, the command from Paul is to run.
Not stand and fight.
Right. You don't stand your ground and try to debate or negotiate with those specific internal urges. You physically and mentally flee from them.
But for the desires, you can't just run away from like that deep-seated pride or the selfishness Paul talks about, mortification, which literally means putting to death.
Yes, Romans 8.
Yeah, he instructs believers to put to death the misdeeds of the body, which honestly sounds pretty violent.
It's meant to.
It's definitely not a passive process where you just sit around and wait for God to magically make you a better person. It requires aggressive, uncompromising action against your own sinful urges.
It does. And then specifically for the disease of covetousness we discussed earlier, there's a very direct antidote, and that is contentment. Hebrews 13 instructs believers to be content with what they have.
Which is so countercultural right now.
Yeah, completely. But why does it say that? Because of God's constant presence. The verse says, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." And alongside that, Jesus commands us to actively redefine what we even consider to be treasure.
Right, shifting the whole investment strategy, like stop hoarding earthly things that degrade, rust, or get stolen, and start actually investing in heavenly treasures.
And all of these habits, the replacement, the fleeing, the mortification, the contentment, they all culminate in the ultimate mechanism of transformation, which is renewing the mind.
Romans 12, right? Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Exactly. Think about this almost like spiritual neuroplasticity. Philippians 4 says to focus your thoughts on whatever is true, whatever is noble, right, pure, and lovely.
Because what you focus on grows.
Yes. When you repeatedly choose to focus on higher truths, you are literally starving the neural pathways that trigger anxiety, lust, and greed. And at the same time, you're carving brand new pathways of peace and trust. Over time, that mental discipline severely weakens the grip of those carnal thoughts.
And these daily habits are exactly how we stay under the umbrella.
Precisely.
By actively engaging in mind renewal and walking by the Spirit, we maintain that vital daily intimacy with God. We prevent those destructive self-inflicted wounds we talked about. But, I want to zoom out for a second. We've talked about the daily habits, but what is the long-term end game here? Like, where is this all actually leading?
Well, it leads to the massive difference between a spiritual infant and a mature, fruitful believer.
Okay, say more about that.
If a believer consistently relies on their flesh, operates in that soulish power we mentioned, and fails to please God, they experience arrested spiritual development. They literally remain an infant.
Wait, hold on. Are we saying that you can be totally saved, completely loved by God, going to heaven, and still completely miss out on your actual purpose here on earth?
Yes, absolutely. That is the exact tragedy these sources are warning against. There is a massive theological distinction between simply being a child of God, which is that eternal baseline relationship, and maturing into a son or daughter who actually receives the full inheritance.
Wow.
The eternal purpose of God is not just to save people from the wreckage of sin, it is to conform them to the image of his son.
To reach, as the text says, the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ.
Yeah.
So if you stay an infant, you're safe, but you're kind of useless to the kingdom.
You remain stunted. The mature believer, however, who walks in faith, takes the actual risks of obedience, and actively pleases God, they step into a totally different reality. They receive unique rewards, ruling authority, and this high calling that's reserved for overcomers in the coming kingdom.
So the inheritance is completely tied to maturity.
Yes, and maturity is inextricably tied to the daily habit of pleasing God.
So to just bring this all together for you listening right now, you never have to work a single day of your life to earn God's foundational 100% constant agape love. You really don't have to hustle for your worth. That is the ultimate safety net.
And thank God for that.
Truly. But your daily choices absolutely matter. By choosing habits that renew your mind, by substituting fleshly desires with the fruit of the Spirit, you are actually protecting your daily experiential fellowship. You are maintaining your authority lives as a victor over the chaos of this world, rather than just being a victim of it.
Which I think leaves us with a critical reflection for everyone listening.
Let's hear it.
If God's love is your guaranteed safety net, but his pleasure is the actual gateway to ruling authority and spiritual maturity, what dead works or soulish power of human effort might you be clinging to right now? Like, what internal idols of control or covetousness are secretly keeping you in a state of spiritual infancy?
Man, that is something to seriously think about the next time you wonder if it really matters how you live on a random Tuesday afternoon. Because it turns out the safety net isn't an excuse to do nothing. The safety net is exactly what gives you the freedom and the courage to make Tuesday count.